Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So let's rewind back to the year 2002. The entire world cannot escape Vanessa Carlton. 1,000 Miles, Ordinary Day, Pretty Baby, and just her debut album in general was everywhere. It was all over the radio. It was all over MTV. It was in the schools. It was in the malls. Hell, it was even in the elevator. We just could not escape 1,000 Miles. And the music video obviously was iconic. You know, Vanessa Carlton playing the piano. The piano was moving throughout the city and all this really cool landscapes. The video is iconic, but more so just her first album in general was one of the biggest albums of 2002. And sadly, Vanessa Carlton is sort of viewed nowadays as a one-hit wonder. You know, people remember her for those early hits, maybe one or two of her songs from her second, maybe third album if they're lucky. And obviously, Vanessa Carlton has a pretty dedicated sort of cult fan base, and I think it's difficult when you're listening to an artist like Vanessa Carlton. It takes time to break the spell of those early hits that she had. Sure, everybody likes Ordinary Day and 1,000 Miles, but there's the reason we're making this video is to share with you all music fans and pop culture aficionados in general, that the legacy of Vanessa Carlton is much more diverse and she's a very talented artist. So do not mistake her talent and her abilities based solely on that first album and those big hits that she had, Ordinary Day and 1,000 Miles. So Vanessa Carlton's rise to success was not easy. Up until her debut album, she struggled with a predatory, overpossessive A&R manager. She ended up having to sort of fire and get rid of herself. Her management team were sort of encouraging Vanessa not to, cause any rifts, just go with the flow. You're going to lose your record deal if you try to fight these people, blah, blah, blah. But the pressure was mounting significantly on Vanessa, and she was forced to actually fly all the way to California to have a meeting with her managers and record executives. And she basically stated that I do not want to work with these people. I don't care what they're offering. And there was a lot of pressure for Vanessa Carlton to stop playing piano and to sort of just get on stage with a bunch of backup dancers and do the whole pop star Britney Spears thing. And the whole genre of Vanessa Carlton is interesting because that was during sort of the early 2000s, coming off the cusp of the late 90s. Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, the whole boy band era, and Vanessa Carlton, among other artists like Michelle Branch, were doing something a little bit different, a little more singer-songwriter oriented. Like I said, we're making this video so I can hopefully encourage you all to explore the rest, the plethora, I should say, of Vanessa Carlton's discography, because as an artist and entertainer, she's so much more than just Ordinary Day and 1,000 Miles. So despite the hardships that she did face in sort of the early period of her career, she had recorded and sort of produced this entire album. It was maybe more like a demo per se, but her record company was kind of listening to it and they were just saying, we're not feeling it, not to mention the problems that she was having with her A&R representative and also her management, who was encouraging her not to speak up. Vanessa Carlton went against their wishes and stood up for herself, and this sort of led her on the path to meeting record producer Ron Fair, who was responsible for the production style and the success of Be Not Nobody. Obviously, he sort of brought his whole team on and he added sort of string instruments to 1,000 Miles, and this really talented guy came up with the sort of the concept for the music video. And obviously the music and the lyrics were written by Vanessa. I think she did have some co-writers, but just the cultural significance, the cultural impact that 1,000 Miles and that entire album had, Be Not Nobody, is unmistakable. And we cannot think of the early 2000s without thinking of that little piano lick, that comes in the beginning of 1,000 Miles. I mean, obviously everybody just knows that song. But despite all the difficulties that Vanessa faced, she was able to get that album out with the help and the musical direction talents of Ron Fair. So by the time we get to 2002, sort of the novelty of Vanessa Carlton was maybe perhaps unfortunately wearing off. Everybody had already heard the debut album, and her fans and the public was, hungry to see what Vanessa Carlton was going to come up with. So fast forward to 2004, Vanessa Carlton releases her second album entitled Harmonium, and by this time she was dating Stephen Jenkins of the band Third Eye Blind, and they sort of became obviously intimately relationship involved, but also he became sort of a co-writer, a producer, and Ron Fair and some of her other managers were saying, well, you can work with any music producer in the the entire world. Why are you working with your boyfriend? And sort of in hindsight, Vanessa has claimed in more recent years that yes, she probably should have branched out and not got so comfortable, maybe perhaps so complacent with just working with her boyfriend, Stephen Jenkins, as a producer. But speaking of the album, sort of critically, and also I'm going to talk personally about all of her albums. A quick rundown of her first album. I love the hits, 1,000 Miles, Pretty Baby, and Ordinary Day. Those are great songs, but also has some other really good songs, some deeper cuts on the album that she still performs live to this day. This album does have some less exciting tunes, but as a whole, it works really well. It was the best sounding record in terms of production and mastering and drum sounds and strings, and just, maybe borderline a little bit overproduced, but the album has a special place in my heart as well as all the other Vanessa Carlton fans. And even if you're not a fan or you don't even recognize her name, once you turn that song on, Ordinary Day or 1,000 Miles, you're going to recognize it and you'll say, oh, okay, now I remember that song. But anyway, getting back to Harmonium, probably one of my favorite Vanessa Carlton albums. The album starts off with White Houses, one of the best Vanessa Carlton songs. It then goes into Who's to Say is the second track on Harmonium. Definitely one of my favorite Vanessa Carlton songs. And then we have another song called Annie, which is really cool, progressive, beautiful piano ballad about this girl that was suffering from cancer or something, I believe. Vanessa Carlton wrote a song about it. And then we have some deeper cuts on the album. San Francisco was a big hit from that album as well. Private Radio is an excellent song. So I could go on and on about the individual songs, and we'll mention some of them, but I want to sort of talk about aesthetically what the reason that we're introducing these early albums is to not only discuss the story of Vanessa Carlton, but also to sort of discuss, and then we'll get into this later, but sort of the shift in styles that occurs after her third album. We'll talk about that later, but the first three albums, that being Be Not Nobody, the second album in 2004 was Harmonium, and then we get to 2007 with Heroes and Thieves. That sort of encapsulates the early sort of style and the early legacy of Vanessa Carlton musically and vocally and sort of aesthetically. And especially on the first 2 to 3 albums, she has this sort of really soulful, just a very deep, sort of rich voice, and you could tell she was using a lot of volume, especially on 1,000 Miles and Ordinary Day. Just a real soulful sound that perhaps she didn't really have the technical ability to perform at the time, but I prefer that more. I guess we would say it sounds like she's putting more effort into her vocals in the early albums, into the early style of her career. And then by the time we get to her fourth album, we'll talk about that, she sort of develops a more throaty, sort of folky, less baritone-y, less diaphragm-esque inducing style, and it's just a little bit different. But anyway, also the first 3 albums are characterized by sort of romantic lyrics, not all of them, but sort of relationship lyrics, romance lyrics, heartbreak, coming of age stuff like with White Houses. That's one of my favorite Vanessa Carlton songs. So like I said, the first trio of albums is kind of what her early career was known for better or worse, whether you like that Vanessa Carlton style or perhaps you prefer the later, more electronic, experimental, esoteric stuff. And I'm using the word esoteric because lyrically, her content sort of shifts, like we said, lyrically on the fourth album called Rabbits on the Run, which was released in 2011. But we're going to rewind a little bit back. We've discussed Harmonium, we've discussed Be Not Nobody. Those are probably 2 of my favorite early Vanessa Carlton albums. But by the time we get to 2007, she releases Heroes and Thieves. She's still working with Stephen Jenkins of Third Eye Blind, and she actually worked with a different producer, pretty high profile producer on Heroes and Thieves. She met Stevie Nicks. She did a tour with Stevie Nicks. So she was obviously still very well connected, but she was under a lot of obligations from her record company, and she just wanted out. She didn't want to necessarily feel pressured, obviously didn't want to sell her soul. And that's the really good thing about Vanessa Carlton's music and her career and her aesthetic, is that she never sold out. She never drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. She never had to go through the horrors that Britney Spears did and a lot of other successful artists. Obviously, Vanessa Carlton was in a little bit different category, but just her early trajectory of albums is almost impossible to discuss or enjoy those albums without sort of in comparison to her later repertoire. So is there anything else I wanted to discuss about Heroes and Thieves? Personally, it's probably my favorite among the first 3 trio of albums, minus a few songs. I would have liked to take a few songs from Be Not Nobody as well as Harmonium and maybe package them into Heroes and Thieves. But sort of aesthetically and storytelling wise and musically, Heroes and Thieves is probably the most solid album. There's some really catchy bangers in there. there. Not necessarily real big hits, unfortunately, on a sort of a commercial level, but as a fan, that album is regarded as a really high point in Vanessa Carlton's career. And something else interesting, I don't know if people can relate to this or also are interested in this, but something about Vanessa Carlton's early music and even her later music, something about it just makes me think of fall and maybe Christmas and Halloween and sort of just being young and just upstate New York autumn. Maybe that's because Vanessa Carlton lived in New York State, obviously, for the early part of her life. And sort of aesthetically and lyrically, we sort of discussed some of the themes that Vanessa Carlton delves into, but also there's an aspect of sort of therapeutic movement that occurs in Vanessa Carlton's music. If you know, you know. It just makes you feel good. It's an uplifting, sort of healing quality to it. And Vanessa Carlton's background was actually in ballet. She was at these really prestigious, really grueling ballet programs in New York City. And she sort of claims that desire to move, or that graceful discipline, or just the freeing aspect, the therapeutic aspect of exercise and dance is transformed into her music. And you can kind of see, especially in some of her music videos like White Houses and even some of the other ones where she's literally dancing. Vanessa Carlton's actually a very good dancer as well. And you can see how many forms of art, whether it's dancing, music, or writing, sort of all coalesce into this really interesting artist, that we see in Vanessa Carlton. So we're going to sort of move on from the first three albums. Obviously, the early career of Vanessa Carlton was marked and known for those first three albums. But by the time we get to 2011, Vanessa Carlton was not even sure that she wanted to continue making albums. She was more interested in getting into film scores and more classical, maybe piano, keyboard type music, but she got the urge to start writing again, and she was inspired by this book called Watership Down by an author named Richard Adams. And sort of, if you look at the cover of the book and the themes of the book, I myself haven't read it, but the title of her next album in 2011 is called Rabbits on the Run. It's just really fascinating how she was inspired by this story of sort of these anthropomorphic animals, these rabbits that sort of escape the clutches of their evil owners or something, and sort of have to brave the, very cold and dangerous world out there. And they have relationships and they love people and they go through all these things. But also Rabbits on the Run, being the title of the album, is sort of a metaphor for heartbreak and sort of lovers being on the run, seeking new partners, so to speak. But just like we discussed earlier with sort of the influence of ballet that comes into Vanessa Carlton's music, she's also a very passionate classic literature aficionado. And that is, evident obviously on the title of the album, Rabbits on the Run, which was inspired by the Richard Adams book called Watership Down. If anybody's read it, let me know. I'll probably try to read it soon. And Rabbits on the Run in particular is vastly different from her first trio of albums because of not only the songs and sort of the musical direction, the vocals, but also lyrically, we sort of see Vanessa entering a more esoteric era in her lyrics, and we're going to talk about some of those esoteric lyrics. As a whole, the album is really strong. There's sort of an old vintage quality to Rabbits on the Run. She actually, in fact, recorded it on analog tape, which is really cool. I don't think many people are doing that anymore nowadays, but just a fascinating album. The first two tracks, that being Rabbits on the Run and I Don't Want to Be a Bride, I think is the second one, is just great production, really catchy music. And then by the time we get to the fourth track, I think is Fairweather Friend. That's an amazing track. And then the album sort of starts to sort of go into this more esoteric direction that we're going to discuss now. And I don't think anybody on YouTube or even on the internet has really discussed some of the more deeper esoteric mythological or spiritual elements to Vanessa Carlton's lyrics, and maybe I'm reading a little too far into them. Some of them are really interesting, some of them are slightly disturbing, but obviously Vanessa Carlton by this time has sort of shed the demons of her record company. She's shed the demons of her youth, of heartbreak and grueling days of her ballerina era, prior to Be Not Nobody. And she even mentioned that the ballet school that she was attending at the time had some really dark elements to it. And maybe I'm assuming that had something to do with just abusive instructors and also eating disorders and bulimia and anorexia. Vanessa Carlton has, been pretty vocal about her own struggles with body image and eating disorders and such. So just a lot of material there by this point, by the time Rabbits on the Run came out, that Vanessa Carlton had to work with. You know, she dealt with creepy, predatory A&R and music managers and Success. She managed to survive Success, and then she kind of teamed up with Stevie Nicks, and Stevie Nicks kind of took her under her wing. And for Rabbits on the Run, she actually relocated from New York City, I think, to Tennessee, I want to say, to actually start recording a new album. She said that she had to get away from the confines of the Nolita neighborhood that she lived in New York City. Starting with the second track, I Don't Want to Be a Bride. So just a little short interruption here. I actually made a mistake. The first track on Rabbits on the Run is not called Rabbits on the Run. It's called Carousel, and that is the lyrics that we're going to be featuring here in the next part of this video from the song Carousel, which is the first track on Rabbits on the Run. My apologies. Immediately begin sort of the esoteric lyrics, and the first one starts kind of innocently enough. It just goes, I thought I heard your voice in the thunder. It's the owl casting spells that we're under. Just kind of weird, and that sort of plants the seed, these themes of owls, thunder, casting spells, that continues throughout this album, and then into Liberman, and then into Love is an Art. It continues with this whole sort of esoteric theme that she's sort of weaving in. We'll talk more about that. Track number 5 is this really sort of creepy sounding, scary track called Hear the Bells, sort of like a ritualistic song. And Vanessa Carlton says that this song is sort of about her physical ailments that she was attempting to uncover, and sort of a healing song about her visiting witch doctors and trying to cure whatever physical ailment she was seeking. But the beginning of the song is very esoteric. It continues. The first lyric is, stealing glances through the keyhole in a brick wall's wooden door. Chains are keeping quiet secrets on 200-year-old folklore. The graveyard on Elizabeth where no one ever goes. Kneel and pray to a gravestone, but the gravestone never tells. December crossing into Chinatown as the wind starts to cut through. Always on the lookout. But the poison's running through you. My stomach aches. Try and concentrate. Walk the stairs to the 3rd floor. Now I stand before a witch doctor, but the witch doctor won't tell. So just very bizarre, and Vanessa Carlton would never have written anything like this in the early albums, you know, Be Not Nobody, Harmonium, and Heroes and Thieves. She's changing direction. She's delving with more personal matters, more darker, esoteric, mythological, spiritual sort of themes. There's definitely a lot of that element there that I think is worth discussing, that a lot of people I haven't seen even mention it. So what is she referring to with the witch doctors and the owls and the graveyards, and just very esoteric? And I would speculate that maybe Vanessa Carlton has, you know, she's a very successful person. She knows a lot of successful people. She's been through a lot of stuff. Maybe there's some element to her life that is very esoteric, you know, maybe she's in a cult, perhaps. You know, who knows how deep this level of success goes. Is she just a really good lyricist, or is she actually trying to tell us a little bit about some of the esoteric cult-like activities that she's involved in? One can only speculate. By the time we get to 2015's Liberman, this is another interesting concept album. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a concept album, but sort of the concept for the album was inspired by her grandfather, I should say, I believe. And he was a successful artist named Liberman. He was a Jewish man that sort of immigrated to New York City, I believe, and he was sort of living in the shadows. You know, didn't necessarily want people to know he was Jewish, because that was in the old days, you know, right after the days of Tiny Mustache Man and the Third Reich and all that. So, but he did want to have an artistic career somewhat, so he just sort of painted as a hobby, I'm assuming. I've seen some of his work. It's actually really, really good. But she had this large sort of painting of these women, this sort of interior scene of these people that her grandfather Liberman painted, and Vanessa was sitting at the piano across from this really interesting painting, and she says that the painting, even from beyond the grave, or just, you know, sort of thematically and spiritually, creatively, started to inspire her. And she said that sort of the colors of the painting and the aesthetics of the painting, and maybe just the spirit of Liberman himself, sort of came into Vanessa Carlton and sort of was infiltrated, and the way she started writing the songs sort of informed the color palette musically, thematically, lyrically for Liberman. Another really esoteric spiritual aspect that Vanessa Carlton is pursuing. You know, she's really into this sort of metaphysical, spiritual manifestation, esoteric sort of thing that she associates with music and creativity, and it's just really fascinating. More esoteric lyrics occur in this album pretty early on with the second track called Willows, and we're going to read some of those lyrics here. Sow the earth a blanket of bounty, in the distance a hearse. The devil drives empty in a baby's eyes. The ritual purifies every design. What the hell is Vanessa Carlton trying to tell us there? She's talking about rituals and babies and devils and all kinds of strange esoteric things, and obviously we're using sort of the comparison of the first trio of albums to the later trio of albums in comparison, because as a form of discussion, because they're so vastly different. Also, Lieberman, I failed to mention too, really goes full throttle with more electronic, I guess you would compare it to like Christian pop music or Christian worship music, a lot of electronic effects and electronic drum beats, sort of drony, sort of experimental noises. And this album in particular, Lieberman definitely introduces Vanessa Carlton's new vocal style, and I think it can definitely be understood if you listen to a song like House of Seven Swords or Take It Easy or Nothing Where Something Used to Be. Those are some notable tracks, but her vocals, they got really sort of throaty and sort of more infantile, girlish, I guess you would say. We don't hear her really belting, and really we don't hear this sort of operatic classical influence that we heard on the first three albums. And I tend to prefer the older vocal style. It's almost like, especially if you see her live now, she's a much more quiet vocalist. Maybe this was intentional, or maybe she just prefers that style. Maybe her vocal coach encouraged her that was her strong point, sort of this more throaty, sort of folky sound, which I think is okay. It works really well on some songs, but on some songs it comes across as a little bit, it sounds like she's maybe not trying as hard. Maybe she doesn't want to damage her voice or something. So just an interesting shift, not only lyrically and thematically, but also vocally and musically. So fast forwarding to 2020, we have the release of Vanessa Carlton's album titled Love is an Art. And this is actually another really, really profound, interesting album, and it's even more experimental than Lieberman. We sort of see the same musical production, electronic, sort of drum beat, drum machine, drum production, sort of driven music style. Some of the songs don't even have drums. We see these epic open chords like we hear in Love is an Art. That's a really great song. We have this really cool song on Love is an Art called Salesman that sort of sounds like an electronic Rush song. We have some really other interesting tracks on there, but musically, sonically, lyrically, this album is really strong. There are some political influences, but mostly it's just about healing from the loss of love, learning to figure out what love is, different types of love. I have another really great song called Only Way to Love. There's another really good song called I Know You Don't Mean It. And also, as the album progresses, she explores some darker themes like she does in Miner's Canary, which is sort of her experience with narcissistic abuse, with a toxic relationship. So unfortunately, album-wise, Love is an Art is the last piece of music that she produced under the name Vanessa Carlton, but she did score a film score, wrote like some kind of music for a movie in collaboration with another composer, I believe, and that movie is titled Wish You Were Here. Not sure what it's about. It looks like it might be about like an interracial relationship or something, but that might be something worth exploring just for my own fandom of Vanessa Carlton. I haven't really explored it. So that will sort of conclude our Vanessa Carlton retrospective. I'm sorry if it was a little all over the place, but just a lot of information, a lot of different rabbit holes you could go down with Vanessa Carlton. She's obviously a very talented artist, a very talented woman, vocally, musically, piano-wise, and something about when I see or I hear Vanessa Carlton play this piano, it just sort of captivates me, and a lot of artists were attracted to them for their outward appearance, like Britney Spears, for example. I mean, she has it all. Very attractive. She's very sensual on stage. She dances good. With Vanessa Carlton, it's a little bit different. Yes, she's an attractive woman, but you're not really focusing on how she looks or the, sexy dance moves that she's doing. You're compelled to listen and to watch her because just of this calming, beautiful, therapeutic, spiritual effect that she has on you through the piano and the combination of her voice. And during COVID in particular, she started doing a lot of live streams on her Instagram, just kind of having fun and practicing and sort of interacting with her fans like that. So just an artist that I will encourage my viewers to try to explore a little bit more. Yes, she had the first couple albums that were hits, White Houses, Ordinary Day, Pretty Baby. You probably heard a lot of her music. You just don't realize that it's her, maybe. But if you actually go back and study her entire album musical repertoire, you'll really see how she kind of went from point A to point B, how she developed, and what a fantastic, important, and just exceptional artist that she is, and that we should try to cherish and try to better appreciate, because artists, obviously they won't be around forever. Most of the rock stars are dying off now. But Vanessa Carlton's pretty young. She's still got a lot of talent. She's got a lot of time and a lot of potential. So hopefully she will be releasing more Vanessa Carlton albums. I would like to see her maybe blend her old style with her new style, or maybe just go in an entirely different direction altogether. Who knows what she's going to do. So just a sort of an underappreciated artist, a sort of an underloved, rumored to be one-hit wonder artist that I want to encourage people to listen to. Her music fits really well, like I said, with September, Fall, and November. Some of her later albums like Love is an Art and Liberman fit really well with spring. There's just a lot there as a listener to get out of. Some of her songs are maybe not so good. Yeah, there's a couple duds. Some of her vocal techniques, like I said, are gotten a little strange. Obviously, there's probably a reason for that, but as a whole, her music is really interesting. It's really diverse. There's a lot there. So I hope I've encouraged you all to at least explore and hopefully become fans of Vanessa Carlton like we are over here. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know. I'm sure you all remember those songs, 1,000 Miles, and Ordinary Day, and Pretty Baby. Let me know in the comment section where you were when you heard that music. Those were the early days of the 2000s. We were just coming off the cusp of 9/11 and a lot of tragedies that occurred. And when I listen to Vanessa Carlton, especially the early albums, it takes me back to those early days of my youthful innocence, my youthful exuberance, and all the potential that I had as a youthful person. Her music is very youthful, it's very healing, and it's very spiritual. So I hope you all enjoyed this Vanessa Carlton retrospective, and we will see everybody in the next video.